Hey everybody, welcome back to the shop. I'm Izzy and I'm here with Mike from Klingspor's woodworking shop, who happens to be an expert in sandpaper. Now I know this is probably not the most exciting topic in woodworking, but let me tell you, as a professional who's been doing this for 30 years, when you know what sandpaper to use, the right sandpaper to use, and the sequence to use it in, it will make all the difference in your sanding stuffs. So Mike's here to tell us all about it. And I think one of the things that I think we should really talk about a lot is, are all sandpapers created equal?
Not all sandpapers are created equal.
So what are some of the differences, like basic differences between like the type of material that's used on top of them and the back of them? Tell us a little bit about that.
All right, so for the most part you have cloth or you have a paper backer. Then on top of that they have a glue, and then on top of that is where they put the grain, and then they put a size coat for your different grit sizes. And then sometimes they can put a stearate on top of that to minimize loading.
What's a stearate?
A stearate is almost like a lubricant. Most of the time it's kind of seen as a white powdery substance.
Like baby powder?
Like baby powder, like talcum powder.
No kidding. There's a lot more than just sandpaper for wood, right?
Absolutely.
So you have sandpaper for wood, sandpaper for what else? What else do we have?
We have metal, we have fiberglass, we have automotive industry, all types of industry use sandpaper.
Okay. Now 95% of my viewers are pretty much, they're going to sand wood or in some cases metal. Mm-hmm. So let's talk a little bit about wood process. If we're starting at a lower grit, we really want to hog some material out, what are we looking at? What do we want to use?
One of the best materials to use is the aluminum zirconia. We call this AZ+. What aluminum zirconia is it's a very tough grain, but it's also very sharp. Mm-hmm. So it's great for heavy stock removal of the wood.
And that's going to help with feed. It's not going to bulk up as much, as far as it's not going to get what's the word I'm looking for?
Loading?
Loading. It's not going to load as much.
Not as much. On our particular AZ+ that we have, the plus means that it has a stearate coating, mm-hmm. which we mentioned earlier.
So I have a question.
Okay.
And this doesn't really help sell sandpaper, but can you use a sandpaper saver on something like that if you're doing a lot of work and you want to try and extend the life as much as you
absolutely,
can?
Absolutely. One of the best products that we sell at woodworkingshop.com mm-hmm. is actually a pure rubber stick.
Okay.
And so that way you can turn the sander on and clean the sandpaper out and keep it going for a much longer life.
You just don't use the bottom of your shoe like I
Actually, I do that too.
You do?
Yeah.
See, I'm not the only one. So, all right, cool. So we've gone from that. We've done our rough sanding. Is there a finer grit of that we go to, or what's the next step? Where do we go from there?
Okay, so a lot of times whenever you're doing heavy stock removal, we like to call that planing in sandpaper terms, that we do a 60 grit mm-hmm. and we do an 80 grit. Then after that, I like to switch over to a 100 grit.
Okay. We're still in this material, or are we just moving to something different?
We're moving to something different.
Why are we moving to something different?
Well, the aluminum zirconia is a very aggressive scratch.
Okay.
Okay, so it's when you're going down the process later and you're planning on maybe staining it, you can see those scratch marks, and a lot of people consider those swirl marks.
Okay. All right. So now we're switching to a different product with a different material on the face and a different material on the backing.
Same material on the backing. Both of them are going to be paper backing, but this one in particular is a much heavier duty paper.
Okay.
It's not as flexible as our other material is.
All right.
But what this is aluminum oxide. This particular material is called our heavyweight aluminum oxide. Mm-hmm. What you'll notice different about this is that there's these little areas right here. Mm-hmm. And what these areas are, it's called an open coat. So only 50%. So
if you can't see it up close here, we'll get a shot of it later. It looks like little open freckles is kind of what it looks like on there.
It's a good way to describe it. So what this means is that an open coat material is 50% grain coverage, which when you're trying to sand a softer wood like soft maples, pines, some cherries, anything that's resinous like that, it actually gives the loading a place to go without clogging up the sandpaper.
That's brilliant.
So that's fairly good, and that's aluminum oxide, open coat, heavyweight paper.
Okay. So in my experience, and I've used Klingspor sandpaper a lot, this is really the best sandpaper out there. I mean, as far as quality of use, and when you go from a cheap sandpaper, and there's a lot of them out there on the market, to something quality like this, what you do is you end up reducing the amount of work that you have to put into a project, and you get a much better result, a much effort. I wouldn't say effortlessly, but with a lot less work involved. So I think understanding these sequences is very important. Before we get too much further into this, let's talk about your sample kit.
All right.
Can we do that real quick? And
absolutely.
I also want to mention at this point, and I'm sorry to cut you off, Mike.
You're good.
I also want to mention at this point that Klingspor doesn't put a lot of fancy marketing ploys on their boxes. It's pretty plain, and they do that because they're putting all the energy and all the resources into the sandpaper. This is amazing sandpaper, so don't let the box fool you. By the way, these are so handy to have in the shop.
Absolutely, after you're done with them.
Right?
All right, so what we're actually talking about today is what it comes in our sample pack. We have a 5-inch 8-hole, a 6-inch 6-hole, and what it is 10 different discs, 5 discs of each from 60 grit to 400 grit. So it should fit everything that you need no matter what market you're in.
And this is really the sequence with which you'd want to sand in.
Yes, the only thing is about this one, we want to make it available for everybody, so automotive included, is that we will pretty much eliminate the 240, 320, and 400 grits in woodworking. You don't really necessarily have to go that fine.
Right. Especially if you're doing lacquers or conversion varnishes or polys or something like that.
Correct. Anytime you're going to do any kind of finishing, once you go past 220, you start to burnish the wood, and what that does is it starts making problems with the finish after that.
So if you're doing like a cutting board, like a walnut cutting board, and you're going to just oil it, what would you recommend for like top grit, as high as you want to go?
Well, for myself, the process I like is called an oil penetration finish, and I actually started at 120 and sand the oil into the walnut cutting board.
At 120?
At 120. The coarser you can go,
That's
the
what I
more
shave with.
Well, me too. But no, the coarser that you can go with your sandpaper to start the oiling process, you actually allow the wood to soak the oil in.
All right.
So if you sand it too fine, like if you do a 320-400, which I see a lot of people do, then they put the oil on top. The oil has nowhere to go. The pores aren't open, they're now completely closed off. And so it's just laying on top.
Okay, cool. So we've learned about help me out here again.
This is aluminum zirconia.
Aluminum zirconium and
This is aluminum oxide heavyweight.
aluminum oxide, which are in the sample pack. So if you want to try the sanding process from start to finish, grab one of their sample packs. They're online at thewoodshop.com. They're relatively inexpensive. They're not.
It's $20 for 50 discs.
So it's a great place to start, and then you'll get to have that experience of using Klingspor sandpaper and going through that process. And if you actually do that right after or right before you use another sandpaper, I promise you the experience will be much more pleasant. So all right, let's get back to it. We know the blue and the red.
We've got the blue and the red.
We're on to the white.
So what this product here, this is considered a latex backing. So it's still a paper, such as these two were, but we have impregnated latex into the paper to give it a more durable backing. It still tears, but it's a lot harder to actually tear all the way apart. The other thing is that this lasts 3 times longer, as you can see here from this used disc that I have, and you can see the latex impregnation in there, that it lasts 3 times longer than some of our other discs.
So if you're sanding round surfaces, this would be a great product for that. It's not going to break down as much as like a paperback would.
Correct.
Okay.
What you get with most sandpapers is that when you fold it, the actual resin that the sand and grit is attached to, breaks. And what you'll notice about the latex...
Keep talking. I want to do a demonstration here.
Sure. What you'll notice about the latex, and actually all of our sandpapers do this, is that the resin is actually flexible and it doesn't break halfway. And so what you get is that you can reuse the disc without any problems whatsoever or creases.
All right, I have another brand. We're not going to say what it is, but you were just talking about how it's flexible when it creases and doesn't break. So when I fold this one in half, you immediately start seeing all the white paper behind
Correct.
it. That's just, you know, breaking.
Well, and the other thing is too is that those will start leaving adverse scratches that you don't want to have in the project.
And I sand a lot in the round, like round surfaces, logs, whatever. And this is always the area that it always like falls apart first. So you're saying this won't do that?
This won't do that at all. And you can
Awesome.
fold it several different times, and you will not get the crease, and it doesn't have a memory to it.
So latex back. What's the stuff on the front? I'm not going to remember.
That's okay.
I go back and watch the video.
This is considered our stearate coating.
Stearate. That's the one with the talcum powder, lubricant, and latex back.
Correct.
Okay.
Now, what I want to note here is that this is still very viable sandpaper. This is still usable as far as this side here. And this will shed off eventually as you use it. But it doesn't mean that the grain underneath it doesn't mean that the grain underneath is not usable.
Okay, cool. Well, it would not be good business if you made one piece of sandpaper that lasted forever anyway.
That's what I hear.
Yeah. All right, so next we're going to talk about the finer grits. And this is one of those things that I got wrong for years and years and years and years. Now, I am telling you right now, if you haven't listened to anything we've said so far, pay attention to this, because this is important. This is where we get to that point where we're talking about quality finishes, and it all starts with the sandpaper. So when we're sanding a wood project, let's say I have maple. I'm sanding maple, and I'm sanding my favorite sugar maple. and I'm gonna put a thin, maybe 2 coats of let's say a nitrocellulose lacquer, so something thinned out a little bit. I'm not going a full spray. I'm thinning it out 50%. Where do I stop with the sanding process?
Well, the best place to stop is 180 to 220 on bare wood.
Listen, where's the best place to stop?
180 to 220 grit.
All right, cool. Explain why. Let's hear why.
Right, so anything past 220 grit, you start to burnish the wood. And most woods, I'd say 90% of the woods, you're going to get that same effect.
So when you say burnish, we're talking about wood is a porous material. It has a chrysalis formation. And when you say burnish, we're starting to actually fill those pores, so you're not going to get mechanical bond. Am I wrong with this, or do you?
No, that's actually correct. It's a form of polishing.
Okay.
Because anytime you burnish something, you're actually starting to polish it. You're starting to glaze over the top, if you will.
Okay, so you're losing mechanical bond
to the wood.
To the wood of the finish, and that's part of a finish process. There's chemical and mechanical bonding. You're losing mechanical bonding of the finish to the material that you've just sanded, which means the finish life will last a lot less longer. How did I say that? Did I say that right? A lot less longer?
It is a lot less longer.
Yeah, it won't last as long. So Mike brought us an example, and I changed the lighting on the camera so it's going to feel a little bit brighter, just so we can see this a little bit better. You want to explain this to us?
All right, so this is soft maple, and what I've done is I have sanded the entire board with 80 grit. I sanded this side up to 120, from here up to 180, and then here 400. And the reason is that I had a lot of customers that would tell me they stop at 120. The problem with 120 is that your rays and a lot of the cathedrals of the grain actually stand out to look lighter and brighter than the softer grain around them, which takes the darkness of the stain.
Yeah, it almost looks like dark stain areas rather than complementing what the grain structure looks like.
And a lot of time, this is one of the reasons that causes blushing, as you can see right here is the transition area.
Okay.
So from over here, you'll notice that they're a little bit more blended. They're not as dark and they're not as light. It's a little bit nicer blend, truer color of the stain of what you're trying to achieve. And this is 180.
Yeah.
After that is when you start to have burnishing again, because you've gone so fine into the 400 that a lot of your high spots, the harder parts of the grain of the wood, aren't taking any stain whatsoever because they're burnished.
So they look really light.
Really light. Yep. And that's the pigments in the stain had no place to go. And that's why that is.
I love learning new stuff. That is amazing, the differences. And I mean, I don't know if you guys probably are not going to see this on camera as well. You're not going to see this on camera as well as we are. But it is incredible to see the differences in those. And this is all the same piece of wood, same finish, just different sandpaper.
Yep, everything was 80, then 120 I stopped there. So 120 across the rest of the board. Then from here I went 180 across the rest of the board, and then from right here I went 400. Yeah. So this is 80, 120, 180, 400 on this side. All the same stain, all the same finish. That's called bare wood.
You said this side, I was just checking. So, that's awesome. So there, right there, in and of itself, is a huge time saver. So let's talk about finishes a little bit. So we've got lacquers, conversion varnishes, something I guess more the general public would know about would be polys, acrylics, stuff like that. So should we stop at a different? Should we stop at a different grit for different finishes?
Not necessarily. That's why I say 180, 220. Some woods actually perform a little bit better, like hickories and oaks, at more of a 180.
Okay.
And then things like cherry, maple, stuff like that, they seem to do a little bit better at 220.
All right. And I like the stain demonstration because that shows, especially those high raised areas of the grain, that if the stain's not getting through, the oils and other things are definitely not penetrating, so there's no mechanical bond there whatsoever.
Correct. And a lot of times what happens is that's where your peeling starts to happen. Chipping and peeling normally happen where it's already burnished.
And peeling is totally cool if that was a banana.
Absolutely.
Okay guys, so we've talked about the different kinds of sandpaper. We've talked about what to sand up to when you're finishing something with stains or oils or polys or acrylics. So once we get away from the wood and we're on to the finishes.
Correct.
We have to sand finishes to get those really nice smooth ones, in between layers. Where do we go from here?
Well, in most woodworking, they don't tell you that if you can switch over to what's called Wetdry silicon carbide paper, it'll give you a much better finish, faster performance, as well as last a lot longer than the other.
All right, so this is something he just explained to me off camera before we started, and it kind of blew my mind. So pay attention to this, guys. This is important. This is some really good information. And again, like not having to go stand up to 10 million grit when you're doing furniture finishes, This is one of those things that will kind of knock your socks off, or at least it did for me. So why don't you introduce us to the
Silicon carbide.
silicon carbide.
So here I have what we call our Ultraflex pads. I like these pads because they have a nice dense foam. This side is aluminum oxide, so therefore I like it on your contours, your intricate molding pieces, things like that on bare wood. But I love it when it comes down to in between coats of finish. Silicon carbide acts like a knife that slices through the finish, giving you more surface area, which is what you want to have whenever you're trying to apply your next coat of finish. Aluminum oxide actually acts more like a ice cream scoop. It kind of plows out the finish and doesn't leave it very nice. It's more like a U-shape.
Okay.
It doesn't give you the same surface area.
I imagine the mechanical bond would be probably a bit nicer with a knife edge than a big old U-shape.
Correct.
Right. Okay.
And a lot of times I like to try to describe that aluminum oxide is it's like a pencil. So it starts out sort of sharp, then it slowly dulls down as time goes on. So where this says it's a 180, as you get done with its service life, and that's the end of the abrasive life, it'll actually turn into about a 220 grit. Silicon carbide is so sharp, it's friable. And friable means that it fractures. And what that fracturing does is that when it starts at 180, as you sand from this side of the board to that side of the board, it'll be 180 at the very end. So it's called a consistent scratch.
You said friable. I was kind of hoping you were talking about eggs and bacon, but
Unfortunately.
So why use this as opposed to like this that has no backing on it?
All right, so
Well, I mean, it has no like cushion on it.
So that's one of the biggest secrets that a lot of manufacturers won't tell you.
Okay.
It's so brittle and hard that finger pressure alone will break the grain. So a lot of times if you're sanding with silicon carbide and you put a rubber block on it and you take that rubber block and you put down and you push all the way across, you've actually broken most of the grain on the surface and you're sanding on the resin. You're no longer sanding with the grain. So you've worn out the sandpaper in one pass.
So you definitely want to have a scuff pad if you're doing, if you're like between finishes. This is the way you're going, right?
This is a great way to go because it's all in one. Now you can get a lot of accessories out there that have, a 6-inch foam pad or urethane backer, but the whole point is to not press down so hard that you can see your fingerprints.
So you just touched on something that is, I don't think I've ever heard discussed in a woodworking sense before, but that's pressure. And when you're sanding, pressure has a lot to do with the performance of what you're going to get in the end. If you're
Correct.
If you're like say if you're riding the heel of a sander, if you're not using the sander properly and you are back on one side, you're going to end up with way more swirls than if the sander is flat and riding like it's supposed to. If you're putting too much pressure on a sander, which I've seen so many guys do, they just they get on it, and they think that that's going to make it's going to make the job worse, and it's going to give them a worse swirl pattern. It's gonna eat out material where it shouldn't be eaten out. So you really want to take it easy when you're sanding. For the most part, you want to take it easy when you're sanding, unless you're like sanding with 3 grit or something.
Well, if you're trying to actually surface remove, then pressure is okay. It's
Well,
actually
you call that planing. So when we're planing material, we can get rid of it.
That's heavy stock removal. Yes.
So as we get up to 120, we're slowing down, we're lightening the pressure up, and we're just not. You're not trying to kill this thing, or you're not rolling pancakes.
So basically, 36, which sounds crazy, but it is used quite a bit in wood industry. Is that 36 all the way up to about 80 is your heavy stock removal.
Okay.
100 is an intermediate grit, and then 120 actually starts your medium to fine finishing grits. So what you're trying to do with 120 grit is just remove the scratch from the 80 grit. You're not trying to surface or any more dimension or level. You're just trying to clean up what you just had.
Yeah, and the other thing I see a lot, and you tell me, I see people edge their sanders quite a bit, where they're sitting it up on the edge and they're trying to get rid of one particular spot. Well, the problem with that is when you do that, is when you finish it, it stands out like a sore thumb.
Correct. And the other thing is that if you're using a random orbit sander, when you tilt it up on your edge, most of the time it's no longer orbiting. It's actually oscillating back and forth, causing zigzag lines rather than nice swirl lines.
Okay, cool. So pressure, guys. All right, very cool. This is mind-blowing to me.
That's what a lot of people don't know.
30 years in the professional industry, from design and even its finishing side of it. Not as much of the finishing side of it, but we've finished thousands upon thousands of pieces of furniture, and I did not know this.
Yep, and this will last a long time with light pressure. If you push too hard and you see your fingerprints, you're using way too much pressure with silicon carbide.
Okay, good to know. Okay, so we talked briefly about how to properly sand, and you're going to give us a demonstration.
I am. I know it's not the most exciting thing in the world, but I have a couple of tips that might help somebody at home.
And again, if you are a woodworker and you sand your projects, this video, you need to watch this video and you need to see this. We're here to make your life easier and get you into a product that is the best out there, and this is going to make life so much easier for you. So we have a nice sander here.
We do.
It's a little nicer than I'm used to here, so I'm a little bit excited to see what this thing can do.
All right, well, this is the Festool RO150. It's a 6-inch, 17 hole.
Okay. You guys sell these, right?
We do sell these, yes, and this is a dual mode sander.
You also sell Makita sanders too?
We do sell Makita
Because
sanders.
I got a Makita sander.
I know. It's such a nice sander, too.
It is a nice sander. So, all right, what are we going to do?
So what you'll find is that with a random orbit sander, what that means is that the pad orbits as well as it oscillates back and forth. So we're talking about a random orbit sander. What that means is that the pad orbits as well as it oscillates back and forth, causing what's to be known as a random orbit. What I find a lot of times is that people are pressing down too hard on the sander or angling it too much to actually stop the orbiting from happening. So what you can do to make a test for yourself to make sure that you are doing the proper sanding is to make yourself about a 1/2 inch wide mark. Now in this case we have a white pad, so we use a black Sharpie. If you have a black pad, a silver Sharpie will come in handy as well. But what it'll do is it'll actually show you when it's orbiting properly, you shouldn't see the black mark. And so what that was showing me is that the pad is no longer orbiting, but is actually going back and forth, gouging into the wood, making a scratch.
So you have too much pressure.
Too much pressure is what will cause that. The other thing that'll cause that is if you start hot rodding it. If you start pulling back on it. A lot of times too, people think random orbit sanders are also angle grinders, but they're not. They're random orbit sanders. So therefore use the full size of the pad, not just the front, not just the back.
Okay.
The other thing to know too, when you're using this type of Festool, is that it's kind of heavy in the back whenever you're doing any kind of dust collection, and just the power cord in general as well as the motor kind of adds weight. But you can get a lot of control from it just by holding the back and not pressing down on it. Because what we want to remember is that this is the machine and the sandpaper, that's the tool.
What's unique about this, and this is the one thing that people really don't get, I don't think, is that the price. So a price of, let's say, any one of these in a 50 box, what's that going to cost?
Typically around $16.
$16.
For 50 discs.
So if you go to a big box store, their cheap stuff is going to be around $18 to $20 for 50 discs. So best product in the industry for less than what you're buying at the big box store, and I'm telling you that is not high quality sandpaper. So this is really where it pays to take the time to get online, you know, look them up, learn a little bit about the sandpaper like what you did today, and find that stuff that's going to make it right for you. And like we mentioned before, the sample pack is really a great way to start.
It is. It's a great way to get everything that you can need in most of the industries for sanding for 20 bucks.
Right. And once you go this way, I promise you, it's night and day difference. So definitely it's worth checking out. And if you're not sold yet, buy their sample pack, check it out. It'll be worth it, I promise. So here's one of the interesting things about Klingspor. Klingspor actually got started selling bulk scraps of sandpaper, right?
Yep.
How'd that work out?
Well, so we have a manufacturing facility in Germany that sends everything over to Hickory, North Carolina, and that's where they convert it into discs, into belts.
Right. Just real quick,
Yeah, what's up?
from industry, they are making professional industrial grade sandpapers in Germany. All right, so it's not cheap stuff. This isn't stuff that's designed to throw in a big box store. This is stuff that's designed for guys like me who are building thousands of pieces of furniture every year, big machines, cloth back belts, really heavy duty, high grade sandpapers. That's what we're talking about here. And I'm sorry I interrupted you. Let's go ahead and finish
No,
the
you're
story.
all right. So in that process of making belts and discs and everything else, you have scrap. Mm-hmm. And so they figured out that they were actually not environmentally friendly, if you will, at first. Mm-hmm. So instead of putting it in the landfills, they decided to make what's called the bargain box. And the bargain box is end rolls or offcuts of the industrial abrasive that's been stuck into a box and shipped to you for a low price.
Right. And I'll show you guys in a minute. I have a drawer full, 32 inches wide, 20 inches deep, 12 inches tall, jam-packed full of your bargain scraps, because in a wood shop you never know when you're going to have some unique sanding thing that you need to do, And also, there's scraps in there big enough to fill up, you know, drum sanders and stuff. It's
Absolutely.
not, we're not talking about little scraps here.
No, we're talking about industrial grade, similar to that comes into our belts, similar that comes with the discs. It's all different types of material in there.
So that's how Klingspor actually got its start, selling big boxes of industrial cutoffs.
Yep.
And then it's kind of folded into what you guys do now. Again, industrial grade, industrial quality sandpaper at below box store pricing. Okay, it's cool stuff.
And,
all right.
Well, let's see, and one other thing about it too, is that Klingspor Abrasive started in 1893, and Klingspor's woodworking shop, it actually started 30 years ago, in 1989.
So you guys, this is something I didn't know, and you just pointed it out to me. So you guys have the bargain boxes, but you also have,
Bargain belt box.
I didn't know about this.
Yeah, so this is where you can find 3x21 belts for 61 cents a piece.
Now, most typical shop size belt sanders are 3x21, and you're never going to find them at 61 cents a piece anywhere ever, except for here.
That's correct.
And we're not talking about cheaply made belts. This is coming off industrial cutoffs that guys use in the industry in big time savers and big large sanding applications.
Absolutely.
Cloth back, seriously good sandpaper. I know it sounds a little bit like a sales pitch, but I really want to convince you guys to get over and try this stuff, because I promise once you do, you're not going back. I mean, once you go from the stuff that you're used to buying at the big box stores or down at the Ace Hardware, and you try this, it's night and day difference.
It is night and day difference.
Yep.
I've been a user for 19 years with Klingspor Abrasive, so I've been around it a long time, and the quality's always been top notch.
Right? So it's definitely worth checking out. Would highly recommend you take the time to do it. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for having me,
Appreciate
Izzy.
all your time coming down and explaining this to us. Make your lives easier. Go check this out, and we'll talk to you guys later.